Hello, I am Richleth, and today I'm going to be going over Scott's rotation. This is going to be the second episode of that video, and this is going more into detail of the specifics, what you can do to maximize your damage. And the first step is to look at his post on the forums. Yes, I know it's long-worded and has a bunch of math. I know it's scary. Things that most people wouldn't understand, but trust me, it's the best way to learn how to do it correctly. I'm speaking from personal experience here, so I'm using my personal experience using this rotation along with Scott's numbers to really give examples of where I went wrong, where I have to improve, and how you can expect this rotation to work even more effectively. First of all, it talks about how the cast time of different spells. Fireball should be around 0.4 seconds at 0.43, and Affliction should be at 0.55. Now, why these values? These values are chosen because of 3 per second 2-second tiles, detailed down here. 3b2 is representing 3 Fireball 2 per second. Therefore, you're alternating between 3 and 2. Kind of like it's a Fireball spam tile that you all know and love. And the reason for the time difference there is timing your Affliction just a little bit later allows that damage boost to go through. And it allows that tile set to proc because you're slowing down casting just a tiny bit to get a good tile proc. That is very important. Making those tiles proc is what this is. It's this bread and butter. Now, you could argue that you could replace it with other tiles, but there's a reason that this is considered optimal by Scott. He's done a lot of testing for it. And when put into practice, it works. It very much works. Now, being able to proc the 3 a second, 2 a second keeps these 3 tile sets alive. Because keep in mind, tile sets last for a set duration for the 3 long tile sets. It's around something like 6 seconds, if I'm correct. Yeah, it's around 5-ish, 6-ish seconds, somewhere around there. Now, the reason for the cast speed is just like how you're keeping afflictions and the weaknesses barely up, which is the main draw of this, 3 afflictions on the target weakness effect. Just like how the weakness effect just barely gets applied in time to not lose any uptime, the tile sets also get applied in the same fashion. When you're casting optimally, these tile sets should give you full tile procs, three artificing tile set buffs for that amount of time. By the time you get to your next Affliction and Frost, they'll just be wearing off. And when you cast your Affliction and Frost and then follow it up with 7 Fireballs, they'll refresh and you'll lose maybe a tiny bit of uptime, but in reality, it is better to have high damage increasing tile sets that proc most of the time, around 99.9% of the time, than tiles that proc 100% of the time, but don't give as good tile procs. Moving on to the perfect casts. I got this wrong in the video that I did previously, as it's worded weird here on the forums. But the way it's worded is sloppy 100%, exactly perfect 110, and robot 120. That's not true at all. The cutoff for perfect cast is that 10% damage buff. If you make a perfect cast, you'll get 10% more damage than if you were to do the sloppiest cast. And however much you have the spell better than that perfect cast, you'll get more damage, up to that 120. At least according to the forum post. Now, this is important for you developing shortcuts, developing all that, because shortcuts that proc high amounts of perfect casts and good perfect casts at that are what give you the most damage. It's that buff that most people overlook and get lower and lower damage with this rotation. That is the secret here, is the tile procs and the perfect casts. Casting optimally, again, alternating between 3 and 2 a second by swapping between 0.43 and 0.55. That will give you, and even though it says with the 0.43 an average of 2.32 spells per second, what really matters here is getting the 3 per second tile and then casting your Affliction slow enough to proc the 2 a second tile. That will give you your 3 per second fireball 2 a second, basically. That's kind of the methodology here. If you look here, so these are the attacks up under the attack section. It's a bunch of archaic code mumbo jumbo, but around the second last or third last fireball, kind of in the middle there, is when 3 a second would proc. The Affliction then slows it down just enough to get 2 per second, and that keeps those 2 per second procs. Then it jumps back up to the 3 a second. And that is good because of max tiles, like said previously. Now, let's put this into actual action. What does this look like in game? And I don't even know if I'm going to be able to showcase it well, because I'm still having trouble getting those tiles to be 100% up. And as you see, the tiles are not stacking. That's the trick. If the tiles are stacking, that means you're not getting the good tile procs. You're not getting high damage. Whereas if they are not stacking, that means each is procking individually, which is a sign that you're doing well. Now, it may be tempting to go, oh, I have to draw my Affliction slower, so wait a little bit. That is a mistake. While you do have to draw it slower, that's accounted for the fact that Affliction is a naturally slower spell to draw. No matter what shortcut you use 8-ball, you use potatoes method, you use B method, none of which I can get, apparently. But all of those take more time to cast than Fireball. So on average, they'll always be slower than Fireball unless you're really trying to make it go faster. And that's the key, is since it's slightly slower, Scott's using that to his advantage and using that to get the 3 a second, 2 a second to proc well. And keep that alternating 3 a second, 2 a second, 3 a second, 2 a second. Now, obviously, if you can cast each of those spells even faster, you can hit higher numbers. Like, that's obvious. But that would be in the range of instead of, basically just add 1 to the cast per seconds. So instead of 2.32, you'd be casting 3.32. And if you're doing that, you've already surpassed 130 at that point. You have ascended. The issue is keeping that up for long, because it's really hard to hit for a second like that. Now, what you saw on Dummy was a good representation of that. If we open up Zenzerker's parser, one of the few people who can hit those types of numbers, my damage is going to be really low just due to basically clearing, because that's an issue. But as you can see, I went up to nearly 100k unpotted. That 100k is important. 100k unpotted is really high, so that means I was doing well. You can also see the fact that you're doing 100k if he's draining health. He heals around 95k per second. Therefore, doing it extremely correctly and having pots means you can kill this guy very easily. It only just takes dedication and admittedly a bit of luck with crits. Crits are what give you higher damage on average. The 130 is the average highest. You can hit higher, you can hit lower, but that is on average the max. Now, crits and bleeds and all that, that's not anything you can control. And that's the hard part about making optimal rotations is, do you go crit stacking, do you go something else? And, well, in basically every case, in Orbis's case, it's stacking. It always is. But just read the guide. If you viewers want me to make a reading of that post, if you want me to read it, so you don't have to read it yourself, and have things that I at least personally think aren't explained well in the post, explained better, or in a different way, I'd be more than glad to make that type of video. But that is the end of this video. Remember to practice your afflictions, your frosts, and your fireballs.